What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from the 10-7 MMA show. And this is a quick video that I wanted to make about Arman Tsarukyan after he had to pull out of UFC 311 seemingly 36 hours before the fight. Maybe it was a little bit more than that. Not sure exactly when the UFC was notified. But this was basically unprecedented and completely insane. It forced Islam into a position where he had to accept the last-minute opponent, Renato Moicano, who he choked out very early on in the fight in round one. Renato Moicano got to move up and got to take that opportunity and probably got a bigger payday. And I'm sure he was thrilled despite the loss, but he took advantage of that tremendous opportunity. But we've talked a lot about the fights. We've talked a lot about Islam, or at least other folks have in MMA YouTube. Talked about, of course, the amazing co-main event, Yuri Prohaska versus Jamal Hill. Tremendous fights, lots of great fights. UFC 311, I think, overall was a smashing success. But what about Arman Tsarukyan? I made a video earlier this week talking about how awesome Arman Tsarukyan is as a person, as a fighter, and how exciting he is, and how much I like his personality. And then 24 hours after that, he pulled out of the fight. So some people were clowning me on that. But hey, these things happen. Now, what is next for Arman Tsarukyan? I think the Ariel Helwani show at one point, close after this fight, was saying, all right, this was great, but now we want to see Arman next. And then I think they found out live on the show that Dana White had other ideas for Arman. So let's take a listen to what Dana White said in the post-fight presser. And I want to talk about what I think is next and why the UFC is likely feels the way they do about Arman. So check this out.
Arman Tsarukyan, what do you do with him at this point? I mean, do you automatically rebook him in the next title fight? Do you go back to the drawing board?
No. Yeah, he's going back to the drawing board.
Upset. You can see he's upset. He said no emphatically, right? Talking about not wanting to plan out events in the future on the night of the fight. No, he said emphatically, no, this is not happening. All right, let's keep listening. And then we're going to dissect why I think he is upset. And again, these are going to be theories to some extent, but from my business sense, I think I have a rough understanding.
I don't want anybody to ever fight hurt, ever. You know, we've been in these positions before. Went down there with the doctor, went down there with Heather from the PI, who is, you can ask any fighter or anybody else, she's the best in the world. And you know, you miss opportunities sometimes, and he did. So
I think, and what he's saying right there is they had their own people go in and evaluate him. And it sounds to me like Dana's insinuating that she felt he was good to go if he wanted to take the fight, although maybe he would have been suboptimal, right? But that's, I think, what he's insinuating. So, and I kind of understand where they're coming from. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but let's keep listening to what Dana has to say after this.
We'll see how this plays out for him next year.
You feel like he could have competed?
You
feel like he could have competed tonight?
I have no idea. I don't know that. Only he knows that.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, just get your thoughts on Merab Dvalishvili, that amazing.
Okay, so we're going to stop there. So again, he's not saying that he couldn't fight. He's careful to not say that he could fight, right? Because again, that's a decision technically that the fighter does have to make, but you can see he's insinuating that he feels that he could have and should have taken that fight. So what it sounds like to me is that Arman Tsarukyan did not take this fight, likely because, not because he couldn't, but likely because he felt he would be at a disadvantage and wanted to hold out. Now, the reason why I think this is going to be extra problematic for Arman Tsarukyan is if you remember last year, he had the opportunity to fight Islam Makhachev on a relatively quick turnaround, and he said no. And that's what gave the opportunity for Dustin Poirier to jump in and take that fight. Was the UFC upset with him at that point? I imagine there was a slight bit of frustration because they had a fight in mind. They wanted to give him the shot. He refused it. And what does Dana say right there? You got opportunities. You need to take them. Otherwise, you miss them. We don't know what's going to happen. So this is now, in a way, strike two, where he passed up that opportunity. They had to go on to Dustin Poirier, and I don't think it was what the UFC wanted. Now, again, he's given the shot. Now, think about this. And I don't know what happened. Maybe it truly was a fluke accident. Who knows? But everything has been built around this super fight. Arman has this huge fan base of Armenian support in Los Angeles, because I live in Los Angeles, and there's a massive Armenian community, especially in Glendale. And he had a massive, you could hear the crowd roaring for him during the presser as well. So I definitely think this burst the UFC's bubble. Also, not to mention, this was likely the toughest challenge that Islam had to face in the current lightweight division right now. So having this last minute change, and then they basically had to lose Beneil Dariush's fight, and they still had to pay Beneil Dariush. Okay, so think about it from a business perspective. They still had to pay Beneil Dariush, and just to go above and beyond for the guy, they also paid him the win bonus. That's just money out the door for a fight that nobody's seeing. So they did right by Beneil. That's awesome. But from their standpoint, that's a straight business loss. There is no benefit to doing that from their perspective, other than, of course, they want to take care of him. They want to nurture and maintain that strong relationship with Beneil, who is such an awesome guy. Not saying they shouldn't have done that, but I'm just saying from a business standpoint, that's a loss. And another thing, and again, I don't know the ins and outs. I don't know the details of the injury, how severe it was, etc. But you can say from the standpoint of trying to put together something, and Jesse on Fire made this point, put together something with a partner. And at this level, these guys are partners in this business and in this endeavor. And then at the last minute, they kind of pull out and yank the rug from underneath you. And now they're no longer showing up to something that they've committed to months out. That's throwing a huge wrench into the tire. They're running around. Imagine how much work they have to do behind the scenes to change out all the information, to now have this new fight, to cancel another fight, move a fight up off the prelims. Now that's one less fight on the card. You see all these different moving pieces that have to fall into place to get this thing to run smoothly. And again, that's with about 36 hours before the event. So you can imagine his frustration, and I understand it. Now, I'm not saying that Arman shouldn't have pulled out. Again, as Dana said, that's a decision that he has to make, but I'm just saying I can understand just from a business perspective why Dana is so upset, potentially. Especially it sounds like he felt as though Arman could have taken the fight, at least from his perspective. That's what he's insinuating. So he's probably doubly mad. The other thing is, when did this injury occur? Because it was called off Friday morning during the weight cut. Somebody mentioned that another fighter mentioned that sometimes when you're going through a weight cut, some injuries, because your body's very fragile, you're extremely dehydrated, so injuries could become aggravated. So it could be as though he had a back injury already. Maybe he didn't tell anybody about it, and it was exacerbated by the weight cut, or perhaps something happened during training. But the worst thing would be if this injury was there and he didn't tell anybody that it was there, and he knew that there was a probability that he would pull out, right? That would be a major problem, because he's not letting them know, and all of a sudden they're relying on him, and then he pulls out when he could have at least given them a heads up at some point. And on top of that, with the insinuation that Dana White's saying the doctor checked him out and he probably could have fought, I'm sure they're very upset. So what's going to happen to Arman next? I don't know. It definitely sounds like he's not getting another title shot. And Dana's talking about him next year. So imagine in between, maybe he'll get a fight, maybe another fight. I imagine he's going to have to get 2 fights, 2 wins before he can work himself back up to a title shot. And who knows, by then Islam may have moved on to the welterweight division, or maybe middleweight. Who knows? He does say he wants to take on Dricus du Plessis. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ariel Helwani, where they were talking about wanting to see Arman fight Islam next, which of course makes sense. It's a compelling fight and probably the most competitive fight for Islam in the lightweight division. But they find out on air in real time that Dana White just said what he said. So check this out.
Is the fact that he has said to the media at the post-fight press conference that Arman Tsarukyan is not going to get the next title shot, and that he has to go back to the drawing board. And that would only suggest that they are very mad at him and are, for lack of a better word, punishing him for having to pull out. And that's tough. And
and again, I don't know if punishing is the right word. If you think about it, you just think about it logically. I think sometimes Ariel and the boys take a very emotional stance in certain cases, just always wanting to defend the fighter. But you have to remember, it's a two-way street, and it is a partnership. It's not as though people sometimes think the UFC is just unlimited cash, but it's a business. They can have a lot of wins, but they can take losses too. So it needs to be strategic partnerships with reliable people. Not saying that Arman's not reliable, but I think in this instance, it feels like the UFC feels as though they were let down, and that's a problem. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business owner. I understand what that's like, to rely on people for certain things and then they don't get done. That leaves you in a big pickle. No matter how much you want to support your people, you need to have people that you can rely on so things can get done, and you are operating in the green, not the red. So I just wanted to point that out. This always seems to be the direction that these guys go in. Not always, that's an exaggeration, but a lot of times I think they'll go in, hey, we got to defend the fighter without any acknowledgement of the fact that we need to keep the business moving for the benefit of the fighters. If the UFC starts taking losses, that's going to be bad for everybody. So let's keep watching.
Well, I was reminded, Karo Parisian, who was going to be the first Armenian fighter to fight for the belt, never got that title shot because he got injured, not the night before, but very close to a title fight. And here was Arman Tsarukyan many moons later about to fight for the belt, and he loses it. I pray for his sake that he doesn't end up like Karo, never getting to fight for a UFC title because of some freak injury. You know, I saw those videos of people saying, "Oh, it happened here." We don't know anything.
Yeah.
By the way, at the press conference, he was like the biggest star of the whole damn show because everyone, you know, there's so many Armenians in Los Angeles. That would be a bummer. And Charles Oliveira is back there, by the way, saying that he is next. So how would you feel about that?
I'm fine with that. If I'm being honest, like, next man up. Look, I don't like the politics of this. I don't like the idea that like Arman's losing his shot because he had to pull out of a fight because he was injured. Like that should be no stain on his record, right? Like if you're gonna here, I'll put.
And actually, so New York Rick always has very reasonable, I feel like, logical takes. And I think what he's saying is, hey, I'm okay with this, on to the next. And I get his point saying that there shouldn't be a stain on your record from an injury. But again, I think Dana's angry, and whatever people might want to say about Dana, he's not an illogical person. He's not angry because this guy broke his foot doing the weight cut and he literally cannot fight. It's probably something along the lines of either an injury that he should have let them know about prior, so they had a little bit more notice or lead time to make adjustments, or it's an injury. More likely, I think it's an injury that he felt as though he could have fought through and still gave a very, you know, convincing and terrific performance, at least in his mind, or at least good enough where the card doesn't suffer. And he said he's insinuating the doctor checked him out and felt as though he was good to go and good to fight, and he still chose not to fight. Was that the wrong decision for Arman? Maybe not in the long term, because maybe he felt like he was going to go and he was going to lose, and that was going to be the end to his potential as a title holder. So he felt the better opportunity was to hold off and try again later in 6 months or a year or 2 years, or whenever that may arise. I don't know. But the point is that I think there's a reason why he would be quote unquote penalized, because if in Dana's eyes, this was not a very like a good business move as a partner. Yeah, I think it would make sense that you not like penalize somebody, but maybe you say, okay, I don't think this is a reliable person that I can partner with, at least in the short term. They need to earn my trust back before we can put them in this position again where we build an entire card around them. But Rick goes on, and I think he makes some really good points here.
Put it this way. If you're going to fight Islam Makhachev, you should be at the absolute peak of your skills. You should be 100. You should be 105%, because that.
And this is true if you're really just thinking solely about wanting to win and be champion. But again, like the point that I'm making, and something that I feel like these guys don't really give focus too much on, is the business relationship and the fact that we're trying to put on an event together. And yes, you should be thinking about your career. But if you've committed to something, and this is something that you can get past, and you're saying, well, no, I'm going to look out solely for my career, and to heck with this company and to heck with this event, I'm just going to be totally selfish. I think that's likely a problem, I would imagine.
That is the number one pound for pound fighter on the planet, and you should not take that opportunity compromise. For the UFC to hold it against him, I don't love that. If you tell me that due to circumstances, Charles Oliveira is the one to get the shot, I'm not looking at this from the who does not get the shot perspective. From the getting a shot perspective, Charles was in the position to get this title shot against Islam, got the cut, and then it ended up being Volk. He was in the same spot that Arman was, and he did not get the title shot next. He got the Arman fight. So ultimately, like, these days in the UFC, all this stuff is kind of on the table. There is no guarantee anymore. If you don't take the opportunity when it comes, there really is no guarantee. I'm okay ultimately with a Charles shot. I would prefer Arman, and I do not think under any circumstances he should be penalized for not wanting to be compromised in a fight against the number one pound for pound fighter.
Now, again, in terms of whether or not he should be penalized, I don't know, right? Like, because we need to know more details of the nature of the injury, the timing of everything. Did he really leave the UFC hanging out to dry? And again, it's not a penalty. It's just it's a matter of, can we rely on this person going forward when we've invested all this money to building this fighter, putting on a promotion, setting up the entire event? Even at Fusion Fight League, we can see what happens when fighters pull out at the last minute on a micro level for this much smaller organization. It causes a lot of waves and difficulties for the promotion, for the organization. They're putting in a lot of money behind the scenes for these guys to get the audience there and so on and so forth. So it's not as easy as just swapping things out and, hey, okay, you're injured, no problem. They're relying on them to show up. So I do understand that. But again, to know more about whether or not putting him on ice per se for a prolonged period of time is justified, we need to know more details about all these different elements. Anyways, my point, this is just food for thought. I want to throw this out there. I do think from the way that Dana is talking and the way it sounds, I think it's going to be 2 fights if I had to guess. Arman's going to have to get 2 wins. He probably wouldn't be eligible for another title shot until 2026. It sounds like is what Dana said, next year. And I think they're going to give him hard fights. I don't think they're going to be giving him favorable matchups. That's my guess. I could totally be wrong, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, last thing I want to say on a positive note, so happy for Islam Makhachev. Showed up, showed out, so dominant. And yeah, man, he deserves all the praise in the world. Don't take away that victory from him just because you're saying, oh, he fought the number 10 guy. He fought who was put in front of him, and he fought somebody who was on a hot streak and who was going to probably be ranked in the top 5 after that fight, which I do think he would have won. So that was a tough matchup. And people are acting like it was so difficult for Renato Moicano to take on this opponent on short notice. It goes both ways. People are just not saying it from the perspective of Islam because he's so good. That's it. So it was equally as difficult. It's just because of the caliber of the fighter, people are not giving it that much weight and saying that didn't slow him down. You're only saying that because he's so good and so talented and so skilled. But it's equally as difficult for both. So you got to give him his props and recognize ranked 10th, ranked 5th, whatever. The rankings don't matter. Renato Moicano is a beast, and that was a tremendous performance. Islam is the man. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. That's all I got. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.